There are moments in life when the numbers don't add up. When you look at your bank account and your heart sinks. When you replay the decisions, the layoffs, the betrayals, the seasons of lack, and you wonder how you will ever recover what slipped through your fingers. There are losses you can trace on a spreadsheet, and losses that never made it to paper but still changed the trajectory of your life. And yet, even in those moments, restoration is not off the table. It never has been. There is a quiet truth many people forget when money is lost, opportunities collapse, or stability seems stolen. Loss is not the end of the story. It is a chapter, not the conclusion. It is an interruption, not a cancellation. What was lost did not disappear into nothing. It moved into a place where faith has to do the accounting instead of fear. So many people walk around carrying financial grief, not just the stress of bills, but the shame of, I should have known better, the guilt of, I missed my moment, the regret of, if only I had chosen differently. That weight will make anyone shrink. It will make dreams feel irresponsible. It will make hope feel reckless. But God is not intimidated by your numbers. God is not confused by your setbacks. God is not limited by your timelines. Restoration does not always arrive as a sudden miracle that drops from the sky. Sometimes it arrives as strategy. Sometimes it comes as discipline. Sometimes it shows up disguised as patience when you want speed, humility when you want applause, consistency when you want shortcuts. But make no mistake, every lost dollar has a pathway back, and that pathway often runs through your mindset before it ever reaches your hands. There are people who lost money in business and concluded they must have lost their worth. There are people who were robbed financially and decided they were naive. There are people whose income dropped and silently accepted the lie that their life was now permanently smaller. But worth was never printed on currency. Purpose was never measured by profit margins. Calling is not canceled by bankruptcy. Value is not erased by debt. Sometimes the greatest loss wasn't the money itself, but the confidence you had when you earned it, the boldness you carried before you were disappointed, the faith you walked with before things fell apart. Restoration begins when you decide that fear will no longer be the loudest voice in the room. Loss will always try to teach you to play small. God will always invite you to rise again. There is a kind of strength that only grows in the dirt of hardship. There is vision that only sharpens when the lights go out. There is wisdom that only forms when you felt the ache of consequence. You did not go through what you went through to end up empty. You went through it to become equipped. Some losses happened because of choices you made. Some happened because of choices other people made. Some happened because life simply lifed. But none of them happened outside of purpose. What looked like subtraction has been quietly working like multiplication in ways you could not see at the time. Restoration is not always about getting back the exact same dollars in the same form. Sometimes it comes back as opportunity. Sometimes it returns as access. Sometimes it arrives as favor. Sometimes it shows up as peace where panic used to live. But even when it looks different, the value is never less. There is a reason the vision keeps coming back. There is a reason the desire to build, grow, invest, and expand still stirs inside you. If your season were truly over, the hunger would be gone. The fact that you still yearn for more is evidence that more is still assigned to you. There are people who think faith is irresponsible when it comes to money. They believe it's only about hustle, grind, and strategy. But faith does not cancel wisdom. It directs it. Faith does not ignore numbers. It refuses to be ruled by them. Faith is not pretending the loss didn't hurt. Faith is believing the loss does not get the final say. What was taken from you did not take the wisdom you gained. What left your hands did not leave your spirit empty. You are more discerning now. You are more anchored now. You are less easily impressed. You are stronger in ways that spreadsheets cannot measure. And here is the part many overlook. Restoration often requires you to believe again before you see again. It requires you to plant when the last harvest failed. It requires you to show up when disappointment tells you to hide. It requires you to prepare for abundance while still standing in lack. Money responds to mindset. Opportunity responds to posture. Doors respond to movement. When you lock yourself in the room of yesterday's loss, tomorrow's restoration has nowhere to enter. But when you stand in expectation, even with trembling faith, you make room for something new to land. There are seeds inside you that were not planted in your last season because the soil wasn't ready yet. There are ideas that needed the pressure you hated to become refined. There are streams of income you could not manage back then because the infrastructure in your life was still under construction. Delay was not denial. Loss was not punishment. It was preparation. Some people are waiting for money, but what is really being built is stewardship. Some are eager for increase, but what is quietly forming is maturity. Some are desperate for rescue, but what is unfolding is resilience. And all of that is connected to the kind of restoration that doesn't just replenish your account, but stabilizes your future. You are not behind. You are not disqualified. You are not foolish for believing again. The season that emptied you did not empty your assignment. The chapter that broke you did not break your calling. The account that dropped does not define your destiny. There are resources being rerouted that you cannot trace yet. There are connections being aligned that you have not met yet. There is provision moving through channels you do not recognize yet. And even right now, as you read these words, there is a recalibration happening inside your courage, inside your vision, inside your willingness to trust again. You don't need to go back and become who you were before the loss. That version didn't have today's wisdom. Today's version knows how to ask better questions, how to set better boundaries, how to think beyond survival and into legacy. The restoration coming into your life is not fragile. It is not temporary. It is not dependent on perfection. It is built to last because it is growing in a life that has already been tested. So when doubt whispers that it's too late, answer with movement. When fear suggests you should settle, answer with preparation. When shame reminds you of what slipped away, answer with vision for what is now within reach. You did not survive lack just to live afraid of abundance. You did not endure collapse just to become allergic to construction. You did not lose just to stay low. There is more in front of you than behind you, even if today still feels uncertain. The money that left your hands did not leave your future bankrupt. What is assigned to you cannot be deleted by a season. What is promised cannot be erased by pressure. What is coming back will be wiser, steadier, and lean with the person you have become. And even now, courage is rising where hesitation once lived. Expectation is growing where despair tried to settle. And restoration is unfolding in ways that are already in motion, whether your eyes can track them yet or not. Loss has a way of trying to rewrite your identity if you let it. One moment you are confident in your ability to build, dream, and expand, and the next you are staring at what slipped through your fingers, wondering if you were ever qualified in the first place. Financial loss doesn't just drain accounts, it attacks memory, perspective, and courage. It tries to convince you that because something was lost, something must be wrong with you. But purpose was never stored in your bank balance, and destiny was never dependent on a single season of success or failure. There are people who made one decision that cost them thousands and allowed that mistake to become the loudest thing they've ever done. There are people who trusted the wrong partner, invested in the wrong opportunity, followed the wrong advice, and now wear private shame like a permanent label. But a wrong turn does not erase a right calling. A misstep does not cancel a divine assignment. You are not the sum total of your worst financial moment. What makes loss so powerful is not just what it takes from you materially, but what it tries to steal from you internally. It wants your confidence, your voice, your willingness to try again. It wants you to shrink your expectations and negotiate your dreams down to something safer. But safety built on fear is just another kind of bondage. Purpose requires risk. Growth requires exposure. Expansion demands faith, even after disappointment. Some people believe that if something was truly meant for them, they wouldn't have lost it. But that idea misunderstands how calling works. Calling is not fragile. It does not shatter the moment pressure shows up. It is refined through challenge, strengthened by resistance, and clarified by struggle. If loss could cancel purpose, no one who ever failed would ever rise again. Yet history, faith, and life itself prove that falling is often the doorway to becoming. There are seasons when loss happens not because you were careless, but because you were brave. You stepped out. You tried. You dared to believe something could grow. And even if it didn't work the way you expected, courage still counts. Faith still matters. Obedience still carries weight. You don't become disqualified just because the outcome hurt. The problem comes when loss makes you rewrite your future based on your past. When you speak smaller because you once fell hard. When you dream cautiously because you once lost boldly, when you pray timidly because you once hoped big and felt disappointed, but you are not called to be a reduced version of yourself just because a season went wrong. You are called to evolve, not erase. Your value was never tied to what you could earn. Your identity was never determined by how much you could produce. You were valuable before you ever had your first dollar, and you will be valuable long after temporary loss fades into memory. Money is a tool, not a thermometer for your worth. And when you confuse the two, loss becomes identity instead of incident. Even the wisdom you now carry proves that purpose is still active. You see smarter now. You listen differently now. You measure risk with more discernment. You ask better questions. You recognize red flags. You honor your intuition. None of that came from comfort. It came from experience. And experience is proof that the story isn't over. What you lost taught you how to guard what you build next. What broke taught you what can't be trusted again. What failed taught you what needs structure. The loss did not empty you, it shaped you, and what shapes you is often what qualifies you for what's next. There is also grace for the version of you who did not know what you know now. So many people remain trapped in regret because they judge their past self by their present awareness. But growth is proof that you were always learning, always becoming, always moving forward, even when it felt like you were falling backward. You don't have to pay forever for a lesson you already learned. You don't have to remain imprisoned by a chapter that already ended. You don't have to treat your purpose as if it were on probation. Once wisdom has been gained, punishment no longer serves progress. Loss does not mean you are unreliable. It does not mean you are irresponsible. It does not mean you are untrustworthy with what's next. It means you are human, and humans grow through struggle, not despite it. There are people watching you who have no idea what you've lost. They only see the strength you carry now. They only feel the wisdom you speak with now. They only witness the resilience you walk with now. The very thing you thought disqualified you has been qualifying you in rooms you haven't even entered yet. Your purpose did not bleed out when the money left your hands. Your calling did not dissolve when the numbers dropped. What is inside you is older than your last failure and stronger than your last setback. And it is still active, still valid, still waiting for expression. Even now, the fact that you still care, still think, still dream, still imagine something better is proof that the fire never went out. It may have dimmed, it may have flickered, but it never died. You are not behind because you lost. You are not finished because you fell. You are not forgotten because something failed. What is assigned to you is still looking for you at the intersection of faith, courage, and willingness to rise again. Restoration always draws a map through the mind before it ever reaches the hands. Long before money shows up in accounts, it has to be allowed back into thought, vision, and expectation. Most people think the greatest battle after loss is in the marketplace, but the first battlefield is internal. What you believe after disappointment quietly decides what you will dare to pursue again. If fear becomes your financial advisor, it will always recommend retreat, caution, delay, and settling. Loss trains the mind to expect lack. It teaches you to scan for danger instead of opportunity. It makes you interpret neutral moments as threats and small challenges as confirmation that you should never have tried again. And over time, that posture becomes normal. You stop noticing that your world is shrinking because it's wrapped in the language of being realistic. But realism without faith easily becomes another name for resignation. Restoration cannot flow into a mind that refuses to imagine differently. If every new idea is filtered through what failed before, you will unconsciously sabotage the very doors you prayed to see open. You will talk yourself out of taking steps that once felt natural. You will question timing, doubt worthiness, and negotiate your expectations downward until disappointment feels less risky than hope. What happens in the mind shapes what the hands reach for. If you believe abundance is dangerous, you will repel it while asking for it. If you believe you are not capable of managing increase, you will shrink right before expansion arrives. If you believe loss is proof of disqualification, you will stand in rooms of opportunity feeling like a trespasser instead of a steward. Restoration requires a willingness to release the identity formed in struggle. Survival taught you how to stretch. Scarcity taught you how to conserve. Disappointment taught you how to brace yourself. Those skills were necessary for that season, but they cannot remain in charge when the season shifts. You cannot build a future of expansion using tools designed only for survival. The mind has to move from defense to expectation, from contraction to preparation, from protecting what little remains to positioning for what's next. This shift feels dangerous at first because it requires vulnerability. Expectation exposes you to the possibility of disappointment again. Preparation requires faith that something is actually coming, and faith asks you to operate before visible proof arrives. Many people want restoration without reimagining their capacity. They want increase without stretching their thinking. They hope for overflow while still rehearsing old narratives of failure. But new fruit requires new containers. Old thought pattern. NS cannot carry new weight. Restoration often asks questions that feel uncomfortable. Are you willing to think beyond what hurt you? Are you willing to trust your discernment again? Are you willing to make decisions without constantly asking what could go wrong first? Are you willing to believe that wisdom has replaced naivety without replacing boldness? The mind that survived collapse often becomes highly skilled at detecting threats, but untrained at recognizing opportunity. It can name every potential loss, but struggles to articulate potential gain. It prepares for disaster more easily than success. And while this seems like wisdom, it can quietly become a ceiling. Faith is not the absence of caution. It is the refusal to let caution be sovereign. Faith allows you to move even when absolute certainty is unavailable. It allows you to plant before you see the harvest, to prepare before you see the proof, to believe before the numbers cooperate. What you repeatedly tell yourself about your financial future shapes the posture of your faith. If your thoughts are constantly rehearsing what you cannot afford, what you cannot risk, what you can no longer try, your future begins to reflect that language. The mind does not just observe reality, it participates in constructing it. Restoration invites you to change the conversation you have with yourself when you see opportunity. Instead of immediately searching for why it might fail, you begin to ask what it might require. Instead of fixating on what you could lose, you begin to calculate what you could learn. Instead of assuming you are underqualified, you begin to acknowledge the weight of what you've already survived. A restored mind learns how to dream without immediately apologizing for it. It learns how to see possibility without instantly demanding proof. It learns how to prepare without waiting for permission for past disappointment. This does not mean pretending loss never happened. It means allowing loss to inform wisdom without dictating identity. It means letting experience refine discernment without dimming courage. It means learning how to sit with uncertainty without letting it paralyze movement. Every bold step after loss is first taken internally. The decision to believe again is made long before the step is visible. The choice to prepare for increase happens quietly in private habits, private thoughts, private expectations. The public result only reveals what was already cultivated in secret. You begin to notice the shift when opportunities no longer terrify you the way they once did, when the idea of expansion no longer feels irresponsible but necessary, when you stop waiting to feel completely ready before you move, when you recognize that readiness often grows in motion, not in stillness. Restoration does not chase a fearful mind because fear has no place to store what restoration carries. Increase requires space. Opportunity requires room. The mind has to be cleared of constant dread to make room for development, creativity, and strategic vision. The more you rehearse expansion in your thinking, the less foreign it feels in your experience. The more you visualize flexibility instead of fragility, the more your decisions begin to reflect confidence instead of caution. The more you allow yourself to imagine provision instead of shortage, the more you start to notice where supply is already lining up. Your hands will never reach consistently for what your mind has rejected as impossible. Your feet will hesitate around doors your thoughts have already labeled as dangerous. Your voice will soften in rooms your inner narrative has already decided you don't belong in. Everything changes when the inner conversation shifts from "what if I fail again?" to "what if I've grown since then?" From "what if I lose?" to "what if I learn?" From "what if I'm not ready?" to "what if readiness is built in the trying?" The mind that welcomes restoration does not wait for certainty to act. It moves with trembling faith, imperfect confidence, and growing expectation, allowing belief to lead behavior instead of letting behavior wait for perfect belief. Seasons of loss often feel like punishment when they are actually classrooms. What looks like delay is frequently development working quietly behind the scenes. In the moment, all you can feel is what was taken, what collapsed, what no longer works, but time has a way of revealing that what felt like subtraction was actually shaping the capacity needed for a much larger future. Struggle does not mean you are being pushed out of purpose. It often means you are being shaped to hold it. Preparation rarely feels productive. It feels slow, hidden, uneventful. It feels like waiting when you want movement. It feels like obscurity when you want visibility. It feels like restraint when you want release. But preparation is the invisible labor that gives future success its strength. Without it, increase becomes temporary instead of sustainable. Loss teaches stewardship in ways comfort never could. When resources are limited, priorities become clear. Waste becomes obvious. Discipline becomes necessary. You learn the difference between what you want and what you need. You learn how to stretch, how to adapt, how to innovate when convenience is removed. These are not survival tricks. They are leadership lessons. Some of the discipline you now possess was born out of necessity, but it will become the structure that supports your next level. The boundaries you learn to set out of pain will become the protection that preserves future success. The patience you were forced to develop will become the endurance that allows you to outlast pressure when expansion comes. There are people who pray for overflow but have never practiced consistency. There are people who desire influence but resist accountability. There are people who long for abundance but avoid structure. Loss introduces structure in ways that comfort rarely does. It forces alignment between desire and responsibility. Preparation also deals with motivation. When everything is comfortable, it is easy to mistake convenience for commitment. But when everything becomes hard, you quickly find out what you truly value. You discover what you are willing to work for when applause is absent. You learn what you can sustain without external validation. This season of refining purifies intention. It separates hunger from hype. It clarifies whether you wanted success for status or for impact. It strips away performance and leaves behind purpose. What survives that kind of testing is what can be trusted with longevity. Loss reveals where your foundations were weak, not to shame you, but to strengthen you. If something collapsed, it exposed where reinforcement was needed. If something failed, it showed where strategy was incomplete. If something broke, it revealed where pressure exceeded preparation. These insights are not for regret, they are for rebuilding. There is also preparation happening in relationships. You learn who supports without using. You learn who advises without controlling. You learn who celebrates without competition. competition. You learn who disappears when benefit is gone. These revelations protect your future from alliances that would have drained what you are about to build. Preparation also retrains how you measure success. Instead of only counting what you gain, you learn to value what you keep. Instead of chasing speed, you begin to appreciate stability. Instead of craving constant expansion, why? Oh, you grow to respect endurance. The season reshapes what winning actually means. What felt like isolation was also insulation. It protected you from distractions you were not ready to manage yet. It shielded you from influence that could have corrupted clarity. It limited exposure so that focus could deepen. What felt lonely was also intentional. Some doors closed not because you were rejected, but because your capacity was still being developed. Some opportunities passed not because you were overlooked, but because the weight of them would have crushed you at that stage. Some delays were acts of mercy you could not recognize at the time. Preparation builds muscle you cannot borrow later. You cannot outsource character. You cannot rush discernment. You cannot skip wisdom and expect stability. These things are painfully slow to develop, but they are the very bones that keep future success from collapsing under its own weight. Loss stripped away illusions. It removed the fantasy that money alone can protect you. It exposed the limits of connections. It shattered the idea that momentum guarantees safety. In doing so, it redirected your confidence away from temporary sources and anchored it in something far deeper. This season redefines power. Power is no longer defined by what you control, but by what you can endure. It is no longer about how fast you can rise, but how steadily you can remain. It is no longer about how much you accumulate, but how wisely you can build. You are being trained to handle more than you think. The pressure you survived was not designed to break you. It was designed to reveal how much you could carry. The resistance you faced was not random. It was resistance training for responsibility. What you thought was holding you back was actually strengthening what would later hold you up. What felt like confinement was actually reinforcement being poured beneath your future. What felt like delay was alignment, teetering into place where you could not yet see it. Every skill you sharpened in lack will be applied in abundance. Every boundary learned in pain will preserve peace in increase. Every ounce of discipline developed in obscurity will sustain visibility later. Nothing in this season has been wasted. You were not being punished. You were being positioned. You were not being denied. You were being prepared. You were not being forgotten. You were being fortified. All three truths come together here. Loss did not cancel your purpose. Restoration begins in your thinking, and every painful season has been shaping you for what you asked for long before you knew how to carry it. What left your hands never left your destiny. What broke your heart never broke your calling. What delayed your progress never delayed your purpose. You were never being dismantled. You were being rebuilt with intention. The fear that followed loss was never meant to be your instructor. Wisdom was. The hesitation that followed disappointment was never meant to be your home. Movement was. The silence that followed collapse was never abandonment. It was construction happening beneath the surface. You are standing now at the intersection of who you were, who you survived becoming, and who you are still unfolding into. The loss refined you. The waiting strengthened you. The struggle trained you. The disappointment sharpened your discernment. The stretching expanded your capacity. The isolation clarified your direction. The uncertainty deepened your faith. None of it was random. None of it was wasted. None of it disqualified you. It prepared you to hold what you once prayed for without losing yourself in the process. You are no longer who you were when you first lost. You think differently now. You move differently now. You guard differently now. You build differently now. You recognize danger faster, but you also recognize opportunity clearer. You may hesitate more carefully, but when you decide with weight. You carry vision with responsibility now. You carry hope with wisdom now. You carry expectation with discernment now. And that is the version of you that can sustain restoration when it arrives. The future you are walking toward does not require a perfect past, only a willing present. You do not need to prove that you deserve another chance by reliving the punishment of old mistakes. You honor the lesson by applying the growth. You honor the setback by showing up again. You honor the delay by staying prepared. You honor the disappointment by refusing to let it have authority over your tomorrow. What is ahead of you is not fragile. It does not collapse at the first sign of pressure. It does not evaporate at the first sign of resistance. It is rooted in everything you've endured. It is reinforced by everything you've learned. It is protected by